What is going on, guys? We are back with another episode of our Pokemon TCG Pocket. In the last one, we did a tier list on the EX Pokemon, in my opinion. Of course, 100% always my opinion. I do encourage you guys to check that video out, but I have part 2 of this. So this is the non-EX Pokemon. I guess it doesn't really matter, part 1 or part 2. They're kind of the same, but you know, you could switch them around. But basically, last one we talked about the EX Pokemon, and I thought the comment section, you know, had a lot of good points. And of course, because, you know, my opinion is always subjective, and, you know, I have comment, you know, from even the you know, the wish list video, and that one's done really well as well, where, you know, there's a lot of really good comments in there. And so you know, I appreciate that everyone comes out large and you know, wants to support and kind of talk about the game. You know, that's really what these videos are all about. So but without further ado, I am going to put timestamps in the description so that you guys can see, you know, where each tier list is. And of course, this list is always subject to change, right? There are Pokemon that I think when the new set comes out, they're not going to be the top tier anymore, right? But for right now, at this snapshot in time, this is where I believe them to be. So we're going to start on the bottom and work our way up. Let's start with the D tier. So we have Dragonite, and Dragonite right away is, for me, the biggest bait card in the game. It's a 2-stage evolution Pokemon, which makes it really hard to get consistently. It requires 4 energy, which basically is the second highest energy commitment that any card needs in the game. It's a dual energy card, and you don't even get to choose what gets the 200 damage throughout with these Draco Meteors. So you could have it all set up, and then you have no idea what it's hitting. You could never hit your target, and you lose the game, right? This is the most high roll of high rolls when it comes to highs, and the most low roll of low rolls when it hits low. And that's why Dragonite is here in the D tier. You know, a lot of people made the joke that it starts with letter D. This is the tier called for it, but I don't necessarily think it's that bad. But okay, and then we have Golem, and Golem's a card that took the game by storm. I don't know what my dog's doing. Took the game by storm when it first came out. It did really well in the first major TCG Pocket tournament, and won. It blew everyone's mind. No one really expected it. There really wasn't. Grass types had a particularly bad showing in that tournament, and Golem just got to do what it got to do, and you know, it can be an okay Pokemon. It's more consistent than Dragonite. It's the one Pokemon on this D tier list that I think could actually move up a tier. But overall, it's a stage 2 Pokemon. It's a 4 energy commit for 120 damage. Machamp EX literally does the same damage for 1 less energy commitment and has more HP. And has less of an energy retreat. So it's kind of one of those things where you have to balance out the pros and cons of the card. Obviously, the press, you know, of it does 30 less damage your opponent does to you on their next attack, which can be useful and does give you some longevity. But overall, you know, Brock only works on Golem specifically, and so you have to already have the full evolutionary line, still be behind on energy, and that's the only version of energy accelerant that this has at all. And so to me, it's just underwhelming for the energy commitment, for the card commitment that you're committing to this, right? You're at very least committing 8 cards to this, right? And yeah, it's just a little tough. Meowscigilith and Chatot, I think I'm gonna get a lot of comments about this, but I just think that they don't put up enough offensive pressure to be worth the commitment that they provide, right? You only ever want Meowscigilith or Chatot basically turn 1 of the game. If you draw them at any other point of the game and they're not in your hand when you start the game, they're oftentimes considered the worst case scenario that you could have drawn into. 10 damage is nothing. You basically give up your turn. for the ability to draw one card, and you committed an energy to that Pokemon to do it. They just don't put any offensive pressure. Oftentimes, I always feel like they're just a card that the opponent's going to target for a free prize card. And Chatot is the best draw power of them, but the best players are really able to just be like, you know what, I don't even need this Leaf card, but like, I'm not going to let you have an extra card to draw, so I'm going to play it. And so Chatot is sort of kind of opponent reliant to actually be a good drawing card. And otherwise, it sort of kind of has the same issue and doesn't even attack at all. Now, they all have one retreat cost. So they're not the end of the world, but overall, I just think they lose you too much momentum. I don't think the drawing one card outweighs you not attacking that turn, basically. So, I know I'm going to get some backlash on that one, but that's just sort of kind of the way that I felt about it, and I really haven't been able to get over it. Moving on to the C tier. These are Pokemon that all are part of archetypes of decks that are usable. However, I just think they either lack consistency or lack power. And generally speaking, they don't perform terribly well in like a tournament setting. Ninetales and Rapidash are, you know, they do get the benefit that they are very fast-paced deck, right? Nothing requires more than 2 energy. They attack for okay damage. And they use Blaine as their form of Giovanni, and it gives them 30 extra damage. The problem is that you cap out at 130 damage, with the Rapidash getting a heads on the mythical island Rapidash. If you're using the other one, you cap out at 70 and 120 damage, and unfortunately that's just not good enough. It does well against Celebi and probably loses to everything else that you're going to play. Now, the reason that in Genetic Apex everyone talked about, you know, using Ninetales, Rapidash, and Blaine was because you get the entire base set of the deck, the entire core of your deck you can get out of the same booster pack. And so it was a really good budget deck in that sense, and the fact that when you were going to like the solo challenges and whatever like that, there were no cards that were the high prize or the high rarity cards, and so they gave you the point for not using super rare cards, and so they're good for that reason. But I think overall, like in the overall scheme of things, I just don't think that they have enough raw power. They don't have enough HP behind them to be bulky enough. And, you know, Ninetales and the new Magmar both lose energy every time they attack, and so you're always feeding that energy, and then, yeah, they just don't have the HP behind it to be bulky enough. So that's sort of kind of my opinions on those ones. Victory Bell, Pidgeot, Alakazam, and Scolipede. All 2-stage evolutions. All in some way, shape, or form have consistency issues because of the 2-stage evolution, but they also have consistency issues because of their damage output. Victory Bell basically needs to have Pokeflute to keep bringing in weak basic Pokemon that it can force into the active slot and attack for 60 damage. So it's heavily reliant on support to be effective, but, you know, generally speaking, it lacks power if you don't get the support already in hand, ready to go. Pidgeot. Late game, this is Sabrina every single turn. It's actually quite good. And for 2 energy commitment, it's actually not awful. As you can see, it's definitely weaker than Ninetales and Rapidash. But on the large scale of it, for the energy commitment that it is, it's not awful. It's a low retreat cost. The problem is that Pidgeot EX exists, and you often play 1-in-1 of them and not 2-in-1, or not two in one of this version of Pidgeot. And so it becomes a 1-in-20 chance that you're drawing it. And although its ability is good, sometimes you don't get it at all. Sometimes you get it too late. Again, it's just inconsistent because it's stage 2. But overall, you know, it does have the ability to be effective. Just it needs to kind of have things go its way. Alakazam, if you guys know on this channel, this is one of my favorite decks to play. But I'll be the first to admit, again, stage 2 have problems. Good players know how to work around Alakazam's damage thresholds, right? the weaker players you can take advantage of, but the stronger players know how to mix their energy up in a way they don't get KO'd. They are playing probably better decks, and they have the ability to have energy accelerant, get the energy they need, and knock out the Alakazam, right? But overall, Alakazam's really, really fun to play. Just, it's reliant on your opponent, right? Like, when you're playing Ninetales decks, like, when you're playing a Ninetales deck, for example, right? You get 60 damage plus 30. If they blame you, and they got rid of their 1 energy, they can't knock you out, right? They did 90 to you, you didn't knock them out, and then they can come back at you and finish you off, right? So that's how good players get around Alakazam. But yeah, I mean, if you're playing like a Blastoise or a Celebi or something and it has a ton of energy on it, goodbye. Like, you're doing 300 damage easy to those ones, you know what I mean? Like, you're crushing them. But it is reliant on a 2-stage evolution. Alakazam has the added bonus of uniquely being a Psychic type, which gives you Mythical Slab as an extra kind of search card. But generally speaking, at the moment, I can't justify putting it any higher than the C tier. Scolipede was a big deal when it came in. We thought it was going to be the next version of Koga, Weezing, Arbok. What we've learned is that Scolipede is not worth the damage output if you can't get the poison off. If your opponent switches out, you know, if you don't get Weezing, Scolipede is lackluster damage, 2 high of an energy cost retreat, not enough HP, and not enough damage. And so ultimately, I actually personally still like Arbok better than Scolipede. It's despite the fact that, you know, you can get a big damage buff if your opponent is poisoned, but without that poison damage already, it's not an effective card. And so that's why it's in C tier. It needs support to be good, but it can be good. Moving on to the B tier, these cards are cards that need a little bit less support. Typically their support is just from 1 card, and the thing to note about all of these cards is that none of them are a 2-stage evolution anymore. We're really getting to the point that 2-stage evolutions are just inferior to 1-stage evolutions unless their ability or they do something that makes them stand out above the rest. Melmetal really likes to have Blue and Giovanni support, but it can knock out all the base 130 Pokemon. It has the same ability as Golem, where it takes less damage. And then, you know, Meltan actually is the energy accelerant for Melmetal. So, yeah, it's just a better version of Golem in basically every shape or form, and uses less cards to do it. And the cards that you are trading for, right? Because even Golem still wants Giovanni in the deck, right? So you still have the Giovannis in the deck, but you're replacing your Graveler, your middle stage evolution, with Blue, and Blue is actually helpful to your strategy because it lets you have Melmetal stick around longer. So overall, Melmetal is just a better version of Golem, although right now Steel types don't really have a lot of support and don't have a lot of cards, so it does make it a little tough, but overall Melmetal is just a better Golem at the moment. Raichu was very, very strong in Genetic Apex. This is the Genetic Apex version of it. 3 energy commitment, but you actually don't have to ever commit energy to it. As long as you have Lieutenant Surge, you can put all of your energy from your bench Pokemon onto your active Raichu, and then you can attack for 140 damage. Now, this was picking up KOs on all of the legendary birds. It picks up KOs on anything under 140. The only thing you just miss a KO on is Mewtwo. You were doing a ton of damage. It was really good in mirror matchups against other Pikachus, but overall it has fallen off a little bit. I still think it has effectiveness, but it's a strong card. It definitely gives Pikachu decks an option for extra damage output, but I think overall, just because of the way the current meta is shaping up, it's fallen off a little bit. Electabuzz is the alternative to using Zebstrika for the decks that still want Raichu in it. So basically Raichu and this Electabuzz are basically used in combination with each other. You basically ditch one of the Zapdos EX to play one of these Electabuzz. And basically it can also function with Lieutenant Surge, and then you're doing 40 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon you can choose. Generally speaking, in the most meta way possible, this is to deal with Magikarp, but with the prevalence of Druddigon as people's frontline wall. It's just a really good card in general, and it's a basic Pokemon to do it. So overall, it's pretty good, but it's the secondary tier of this card, unfortunately. I'd actually put Lumineon in this tier as well. I didn't list every single Pokemon that exists, but Lumineon would sort of kind of be an alternative to Electabuzz in this sense. And we put the same tier. Vaporeon, I thought was going to be really, really good in Mythical Island, and I thought it was a really good pair with Gyarados. It hasn't worked out that way. I find that Vaporeon has done better in decks with zero retreat cost. Like, if you were going to play Starmie EX with Vaporeon, it makes a ton of sense, right? Because you can put the 2 energy onto Starmie, retreat for 0, then Vaporeon can put those 2 energy onto whatever you're sending out next. I find that that's the best strategy right now for Vaporeon. It works well in Blastoise decks, sort of. It works well with, you know, Articuno Starmie. I think it will be a better card as there become other water types to use. But for right now, it's B tier. It has good potential, I think. But for right now, I think this is where its ultimate placement. Like I said about Scolipede earlier in the C tier, Arbok is just still, to me, the better version of what it is, right? Technically for 10 less damage, you trap your opponent in after the Weezing poisons them. The trapping ability is fairly nice. It's used differently, but it takes less to do. I don't know. To me, the 10 damage less to have to find one less card tends to be worth it for me. The trapping ability is nice. I would also say this about Galvantula. You know, we did try a Galvantula Pidgeot deck the other day, but I think using 2 low-tier Pokemon like that, well, using Pidgeot as the lower tier kind of alternate choice just wasn't strong enough. But ultimately, Weezing Arbok showed that it was effective. And again, speaking of Weezing, basically it's a 6-card commitment to having a Pokemon that can be a front wall for you, that poisons your opponent with chip damage, only requires 1 energy to attack, and it can use Koga to recycle it back, take away all the damage, and then be able to go again for another 100 HP. Overall, this is pretty strong. And I think it's actually one of the better walls in the game, but the problem is that Druddigon has just completely taken over that role right now, and so I think Weezing will pop back a little bit. The thing is that Dark types do really well against Mewtwo. They just struggle against everything else, and so I think while there are parts of Dark types that can be effective, like I think Arbok is an interesting card. I think Weezing's an interesting card. I think Scolipede even has the potential to be an interesting card. The problem is that there isn't enough cards for Dark types to really have true partners that really, really benefit from each other. I thought that Scolipede could with Weezing. It almost feels like you have to have Weezing and Arbok and Scolipede, and right now that's just too much energy. That's just too much card commitment in the deck to be able to do what you want. Exeggutor and Jinx are effectively the same idea of the card. Exeggutor has better damage output than the Alakazam for 1 less evolution, and if you pair this with Superior, has the same energy commitment as Jinx. And that's really, really cool. It's really, really powerful. It is an anti-meta card in the sense that you can really stop the high energy cards and like the really fast energy accelerant decks. But Exeggutor is strictly for grass types, where Jinx is maybe able to be used a little bit more freely, because it's just 2 energy commitment. But really, I would say that Exeggutor and Jinx are more anti-meta cards, specifically for grass and psychic types. You know, I know they have a lot of colorless energy involved in them, and so they can be used for other things, but I don't think we've really seen too many dual color grass decks. We have seen some dual color psychic decks, though. But yeah, ultimately, I think they're just good anti-meta cards. They do a lot of damage when your opponent just freely sets up on 1 card, and you can really punish those cards. So, moving on to the A tier, though. This is where we see the last of, well, not the last, but we see the 2-stage evolution deck, a card that have transcend the standard right now in the game. Gardevoir is the energy accelerant for all Psychic type decks. You know, you're really searching for Gardevoir to be able to get your Mewtwo set up really quickly, or set up whoever you want to set up. But yeah, I mean, overall, it's a pretty strong card overall because it can attach things to your active Pokemon. You know, you commit 1 energy to it, plus you do it itself, you know, on itself. If you're stuck in it within the lead, it can retreat on it for free, and then you're still able to kind of, you know, mess around with other things. Like, it's a really strong card. And yeah, like I said, it's the energy accelerant for all Psychic type decks, and so even though it's a 2-stage evolution Pokemon, I think it could be a lower tier someday until they come up with a better card for Psychic types to get energy onto it. Gardevoir will stay a pretty consistently good card. Same thing with Superior. Basically, everything I said about Gardevoir is the same, except Superior can actually do it a little bit better because 1 energy equals 2 when you're putting it onto Grass-type Pokemon. The problem is finding your Superior, not having it be targeted by your opponents, you know, from the bench or from wherever. And if you can get Superior up, you can really threaten a lot of things. I want to talk about Marshadow kind of after I talk about some of the other Pokemon here, because I think that Marshadow is another very good anti-meta card. In a different way, right? When you look at Farfetch'd and Exeggutor, right? The ones that are down here. Now, this is the Mythical Island Exeggutor. Not Mythical. This is the Genetic Apex Exeggutor. But basically, Farfetch'd and Exeggutor are the 2 best Pokemon in the game when you're going first. Straight up. Farfetch'd. Turn 2, like, your opponent goes first, and then you play Farfetch'd going second. You get 40 damage, which is the highest amount of damage you can do from a basic Pokemon in 1 attack. Just as simple as that. It's that strong. It is the strongest damaging card you can go for off of turn 1, which makes it very effective. And Exeggutor is the best card in the game going first, because you get in your Execute, you can attack. You most likely live most attacks with the Execute, and then you evolve into Exeggutor turn 2, or turn 3, sorry, and you put your 1 energy on, and then you potentially do 30 damage. You flip a coin to do 60. Now, the only card better than this is the EX version of this card, but of course, this is a non-EX list, and so Exeggutor falls right where it did in the EX version as well. And then because Farfetch'd, for example, has very low HP and is most likely going to get KO'd in a couple of turns, Marshadow is a very cool card that for 2 energy commitment is able to revenge your opponent's Pokemon. If your opponent knocked out your Pokemon last turn, it does 100 damage instead of 40. So Marshadow is a nice Pokemon to keep on your bench with 1 energy committed to it, so that when your opponent knocks out your Pokemon, they have to be super wary of where their HP stat is at. Because if you try to go in with an EX Pokemon and knock out Farfetch'd or something, and then Marshadow comes back and hits it for 100 and knocks it out, you gave up 2 prizes to knock out 1 Pokemon, right? And so it's a scary thought for a lot of players, and so to me, actually, it's really cool. It makes your opponent have to think before knocking out a Pokemon. Sometimes it puts you in really awesome situations, and generally speaking, again, like, you're just strong against Dark types and Fighting types anyways, so it's actually, you have advantage against 2 types, which not many decks can say. Tauros. Tauros is a Pokemon that I actually consider putting lower on this list, but Tauros's ability to deal 120 damage to EX Pokemon is actually a useful tech tool in decks that really struggle against particular EX Pokemon. Now, I think overall the energy commitment to do 40 is pathetic. It's actually really bad. I don't love it. I think it's kind of bad. So it's situationally good. And so, yeah, that's sort of kind of where we're at with that, though. 40 damage is just not enough when you're playing normally, but when you can get that extra 80 damage onto Tauros to fight an EX Pokemon, and you get a Giovanni off, it's really strong. You're knocking out a decent amount of the EX Pokemon available in the game. Dedenne is electric type's get out of jail free card. Honestly, it does 10 damage, which is really nothing, but you're relying on that 50-50 coin flip to be able to paralyze your opponent so it can't move at all the next turn. This oftentimes allows you to potentially, if you're in a very much a losing game because you don't have any energy on a Pokemon, you need damage or whatever, this gives you the opportunity to get an extra turn of putting energy on, drawing a card, getting what you need. It's very much a stall card. That's a complete hit or miss, but we've seen that it has the ability to win games because it's the only card in the game that really consistently paralyzes your opponent like that for one energy commitment, So it's just really, really strong in that regard. And then this is the best of the best right now in Mythical Island. Druddigon is the staple wall of any deck that wants to stall turns to draw more energy and more cards. I've tried to play decks with the 2 energy commitment. It actually does really well with Greninja in that sense, which also happens to be the only stage 2 S tier Pokemon for me. Basically, Druddigon for 3 energy commitment to do 90 is not, it's okay. But Rough Skin is really where it shines. Any Pokemon that wants to attack Druddigon, which has no weakness, by the way, so it never takes extra damage from other things, always deals 20 damage to your opponent. This 20 damage actually is impactful in a lot of games, and if you are running a dual energy deck, you are able to just straight up, deal 90 damage at some point. And if you're not running any energy commitment that Druddigon needs, you just run Leaf in the deck, and it can retreat without ever committing energy to it, which is pretty good, right? It's pretty good. It's a 4-card combo that gives you 2 retreat costs for some bulky walls if you're running Leaf and Druddigon. Greninja basically is the best of both worlds, where it is Hitmonlee and Zebstrika, kind of the same, right? It can attack 20 on the bench. It can actually just attack 20, do whatever it wants as an ability, and then if it has a 2 energy onto it, can attack 60 into the active Pokemon. This equals 80 damage, which is pretty okay for 2 energy commitment. 80 is actually pretty good. And it has a 1 retreat cost, which makes it pretty good. But the biggest thing is that you can lead with Druddigon, have Greninja sitting on the bench, and then just kind of snipe things as soon as you get Greninja online. But of course, the inconsistency with Greninja is that it's a stage 2 Pokemon. It's more of a utility Pokemon, in my opinion, than a traditional secondary attacker or primary attacker on your team, but it is pretty good. It's right now, it's really prevalent, and basically you can see 3 of the top 4 Pokemon here in the S tier all deal damage to the bench somehow. Hitmonlee does 30 damage, which is just enough damage to knock out a Magikarp. And really the 30 damage on anything for fighting type decks really allow Marshadow to thrive. And so, getting the chip damage on things from Marshadow to kind of be able to revenge when the Hitmonlee goes down is really, really valuable. Zebstrika is electric type way of dealing with Magikarp specifically, and also getting around Druddigon, being able to deal damage to the bench, except this is a 1-stage evolution Pokemon, unlike the Electabuzz that we saw earlier. But yeah, overall, this is sort of kind of where my tier lists fall with it. The decks that are running Zebstrika, for example, with this deck, are running 2 Pikachu EX, they're running 2 Zapdos EX, they're running 2 Zebstrika and 1 Dedenne. Basically, the other versions are running 2 Raichu over 2 Zebstrika. They're running the new Mythical Island Pikachu, and then they are typically running 1 Electabuzz, 1 Mewtwo, or not Mewtwo, but they're running 1 Zapdos. So that's kind of the differences, but yeah, right now, because of how good Gyarados has shown to be, everybody is running decks that attack the bench a lot more. Traditionally, Pokemon that attack the bench are more utility Pokemon, more than your traditional secondary attacker that you would have on your team. Greninja actually is probably the best example of being that utility Pokemon that could be a secondary attacker, where I think Zebstrika and Hitmonlee are more strict utility Pokemon, but as the game evolves, I think Hitmonlee and Zebstrika will probably fall off a little bit. Greninja will still probably be used. It's a really strong card. So that is the tier list today. If you have any suggestions on, placements of this that's a little bit off to you, make sure to leave it in the comment section down below. Obviously this is just an opinion, and my opinions change as well. And of course the new set comes out really, really soon, and so I just wanted to kind of get a recap of what was going on. So yeah, I want to thank everyone for checking out the video. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe if you haven't already. The new set's coming out, so we'll have plenty of content coming out soon, and I will see you guys tonight.